Welcome. We are opening the file today on an incredibly challenging and profoundly tragic subject. Before we begin, we really have to state that the utmost sensitivity is required here.
Absolutely.
This analysis centers on the devastating loss of three young children, Liane, who is 6, and her 2-year-old twin sisters, Maya and Carla. We're going to approach the extensive documentation around the trial of their mother, Lauren Dickason, with as much impartiality as we can.
It's vital we establish that tone.
Mm,
We are here purely as analysts, looking at what became a very complex legal and psychological conflict.
right.
Lauren Dickason, a doctor who had just immigrated from South Africa, admitted to the deaths of her daughters in September 2021. The central question, the one that really consumed the New Zealand court system, is what we're going to look at today. It's the difference between murder, the partial defense of infanticide, and a plea of insanity.
So we're examining court transcripts, psychiatric reports, police records.
Exactly. All of it. To understand how law and psychology collided in this case.
Our mission here is to synthesize this huge, often contradictory record into a clear narrative. We want to help you understand the long arc of suffering, the sudden deterioration, and the profound disagreements among the forensic experts that made the jury's job so incredibly difficult.
We're looking for the tension points.
Yes. And to start, we have to lay the foundation. The family's background, her career, and the history of mental health struggles that began long, long before they ever got on a plane to New Zealand. Lauren Dickason was, by all accounts, a highly educated professional. She finished her medical degree in 2004 at the University of Cape Town.
And she married an orthopedic surgeon, Graham Dickason, in 2006. So on the surface, you have this high-achieving couple building a life in Pretoria, South Africa.
But the sources, they paint a very different picture of intense private struggles that go back decades.
That struggle started very early. The records we have show she was experiencing depression and anxiety from the age of 15. Yes, specifically while she was at boarding school. And this wasn't, just a temporary mood swing. It was a long-term pattern, which was then severely exacerbated by major life events, specifically the struggle to have children.
And this fertility journey, the way it's documented, is almost unimaginable in its intensity. It's such a crucial piece of context because it really sets the emotional stage for everything that follows.
It really does.
To have children, she went through 17 rounds of IVF.
17
And ultimately had to rely on donor eggs.
17 rounds. I mean, that figure alone, it just speaks volumes about the level of emotional and physical investment. And that journey was then compounded by an awful tragedy in 2013.
The loss of their first child, Sarah.
Yes, Sarah. She was born at only 18 weeks and died shortly after birth. And this loss, it wasn't just heartbreaking, it was clinically significant.
No, you mean clinically.
The documentation points to Sarah's death as the direct trigger for a formal diagnosis in 2015. She was diagnosed with a major depression order with underlying anxiety, and it was directly linked to this complex, unresolved postpartum depression from that initial loss.
And the symptoms were severe.
Debilitating. The reports mention persistent flashbacks of the delivery, of Sarah's death, severe sleep problems, constant crying, panic attacks, and recurrent suicidal thoughts. And importantly, intrusive thoughts about harming herself and eventually others. This pattern of suffering was, essentially baked into her mental health profile for years.
So when her daughter Leanne was born in 2014, and then the twins, Maya and Carla, in 2018, the joy of having children was immediately sort of shattered by this anxiety and depression.
It was. The sources specifically note that the challenges with the twins were triggered in part by Carla's cleft palate. She was working part-time, assisting her husband, Graham, but the pressure was clearly mounting.
And that pressure, it seems, erupted into something much more alarming in May 2019.
It did, into explicit violent ideation. The twins were still very young, and even with a nanny for support, the stress of just dealing with them at bedtime became overwhelming. She went to see a psychiatrist after she started having these homicidal thoughts towards her own children.
This is the first professional record of that specific thought pattern.
It is the first time it's documented that a connection was made between her distress and this desire to harm her daughters.
The frustration she expressed to the experts about Carla is another significant detail here.
Yes, she reported that Carla was a particularly difficult child, that she was prone to lashing out, slapping, biting.
Which, for a toddler, might be seen as normal behavior.
Of course. But in the context of her severe mental illness, it became a very specific trigger point for her. And perhaps the most chilling insight from this period is a confession she made to the psychiatrist. She said her children were never enough.
It's an incredibly painful thing for a mother to say, especially one who fought so hard to conceive.
It is. And it suggests that her depression had created this emotional void that the reality of motherhood, with all its, messiness and challenges, just couldn't fill. Instead of fulfillment, there was this overwhelming sense of inadequacy, resentment, all layered on top of deep clinical depression.
So this history, this 2-decade pattern of struggle, this is the baseline.
It's the baseline against which the Crown and the defense would later argue about her true state of mind in New Zealand.
And it is so hard to reconcile that long history of suffering with the evidence that comes next. Evidence the prosecution used to argue this wasn't just a spontaneous breakdown, that it contained elements of premeditation.
The pivotal decision that really accelerated this whole trajectory was the move to New Zealand. The family decided to emigrate in 2019.
And they were genuinely seeking a better, safer life.
They were, but the transition itself became this profound source of stress. The move was repeatedly delayed, stretching out from August 2020 all the way to late 2021.
Mainly due to the pandemic and immigration issues.
Exactly. So for 18 months, they were just stuck in limbo, waiting for this promised future while dealing with all the daily stress and uncertainty of a global health crisis.
And the sources show that while she had good periods, the overall trajectory was downhill. And then in March 2021, she made a decision that the Crown later seized on.
She abruptly stopped taking her antidepressant medication, and she did it without consulting her doctor.
She did resume it later, in August.
She did, but that lapse was significant. The Crown later argued that this showed, a period of remission or at least some inconsistency in her commitment to treatment. But the real deterioration happened right after that lapse, in July 2021, and it was fueled by an external crisis.
You're talking about the unrest in South Africa surrounding the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma. Can you just quickly contextualize why that was so terrifying for a family like the Dickasons?
Of course. That period of civil unrest involved widespread looting, violence, just social chaos. For many professional families, and particularly white South Africans, this event really crystallized these long-standing fears about the country's stability and, of course, the safety of their children.
And she became intensely fearful for her daughters.
Intensely. She kept them home from school. And this stress, it brought the homicidal thoughts back with a renewed force.
And this time, she told her husband, Graham, about them.
She did, but his reaction was one of frustration and anger. He urged her to get back on her medication. But here is the key point when you're analyzing intent. After that, she started to hide her subsequent homicidal thoughts.
She hid them. Why?
She hid them because she was terrified that any disclosure would jeopardize their essential skills work visa, which had just been approved. The family had invested years and a huge amount of money into this plan.
So this ability to conceal her symptoms.
Exactly. This ability to compartmentalize her psychological reality, this desire to kill her children in order to protect the immigration plan, this was vital evidence for the prosecution.
Oh, so.
Because they argued it proved she still had the capacity for rational, goal-oriented decision-making, which is the complete antithesis of legal insanity.
And this hiding of symptoms, it leads directly to the evidence of concrete planning. The sources highlight several digital and behavioral things that suggested a fixation on ending the children's lives.
The first noted incident was in July 2021. A friend sent her a TikTok video about how overwhelming motherhood can be, a piece called Mom Needs a Minute.
And her response was just, awesome XX, that's exactly how I feel.
A simple message, but when you juxtapose it with her deeper struggles, the Crown used it to establish this profound dissatisfaction she was feeling.
But the digital evidence got much, much darker.
It did. Over the months leading up to the move, Dickason was actively searching the internet for different methods on how to overdose her children.
So that shows a specific, sustained fixation on methods of execution. It lends weight to the premeditation argument.
And that digital search then evolved into a physical fixation. In August 2021, just 2 weeks before they moved, she saw her husband and children playing with cable ties in the garage.
And immediately,
she had intrusive thoughts about using those same cable ties to asphyxiate the girls. The shift from abstract internet searches to identifying a specific, readily available tool, the cable ties, was compelling evidence for the prosecution.
It suggested the means of the act had been considered, visualized well in advance.
Precisely. So we have this clear, documented timeline of mental decline and the development of a specific violent fixation.
And then the family finally arrives in Timor, New Zealand on September 11, 2021, only 5 days before the tragedy.
And the sources are very clear. This supposed fresh start was an immediate disaster in her eyes. She expressed intense, immediate unhappiness. She described the rental accommodation as small, disgusting, and creepy.
Yeah.
She regretted the whole thing instantly.
And this intense dissatisfaction became the emotional fuel for the final breakdown.
It did. And the defense experts tied this reaction directly back to the concept of delusion.
What specifically did they argue about her state of mind when she got to tomorrow?
They argue that the stress of the move, combined with her severe long-term depression, it reinforced these profound delusions. She didn't just dislike Tomorrow, she saw it through a lens of paranoia.
For example?
She became fixated on the physical appearance of the local residents, believing they were judging her. She was consumed by fears her children would be targets of cyberbullying. And most strikingly, she specifically likened the treatment of indigenous Maori people in New Zealand to apartheid in South Africa.
That specific comparison, coming from her South African context, is a critical piece of the defense's argument.
It's absolutely critical. The defense used this to show her mind was fundamentally broken. Her fears weren't rational. They were projections of her own deep anxiety onto a new environment. By equating New Zealand to the most dangerous and unjust parts of the life they had just left, they argued she established a delusional framework.
A framework that allowed her to rationalize what they called an altruistic killing.
Exactly. That she needed to save her children from a world that, in her mind, was universally dangerous and inescapable.
So now we turn to the final day, September 16th, 2021. It began with, a relatively normal domestic routine. Leanne had attended her second day at school.
And the twins, Maya and Carla, had their first day at preschool. But the tension escalated very quickly.
The source material points to several alleged triggers that day.
It does. First, after pickup, Carla had a pretty pronounced tantrum in the car. Second, during a visit to the botanical gardens, Dickason claimed a group of girls warned her that a boy was photographing her children.
And for her, this was instant confirmation.
Instant confirmation that New Zealand wasn't the safe haven they were looking for. It just immediately reinforced her paranoid worldview.
And this seemingly minor incident became completely overwhelming for her. The sources also reveal a chilling detail. On that same day, she had thoughts of brutally killing the children using a totally different method.
Yes, sedating them and cutting their femoral arteries. That thought is significant because it shows the intent to kill was present, but the method was flexible. It suggests a fixation on the outcome, not the means.
Right.
And when Graham Dickason left the house that evening to meet colleagues, leaving Lauren alone, the combination of all these stressors just struck. It reached a breaking point.
In her account to the police, she cited a whole array of triggers. The children were being wild again, jumping on the couches, not listening. She said, something just triggered me.
But she also cited more bureaucratic stresses. A request from Immigration New Zealand for more medical information about Carla's cleft palate and about her own mental health history.
And also something almost heartbreakingly mundane.
Yes. And perhaps most poignant for mothers suffering from PPD, she said she felt completely unable to prepare the children's school lunches for the next day.
These are all seemingly everyday stressors.
They are. But you layer them on years of severe, untreated mental illness and the intense emotional exhaustion from the emigration. They became unbearable. This combination of the mundane and the catastrophic is often what characterizes the breakdown in cases like this.
What follows is her detailed account of the sequence of events, and it's just crucial to respect the gravity of this sequence, particularly the deception that she used with the children.
She gathered the children in a bedroom, and she used a carefully constructed ruse. She told them they were going to make necklaces with cable ties. She tricked them into wearing the ties around their necks.
And before she began, she spoke to them.
Yes. Her final words to them, which were recorded by the experts, were, "Mommy's very sick and is going to die. I can't leave you behind because I don't know who's going to look after you."
That statement is the absolute linchpin of the defense's argument for altruism.
It is. It's the core evidence suggesting that, in her severely deluded state, she believed she was performing an act of mercy, saving them.
But the sequence of events immediately creates tension with that altruistic narrative.
It does. She began with Carla. She told the police that Carla had been really horrible recently. The child she'd already described as difficult, the one who bit and scratched.
And the fact that she killed the child she had expressed the most frustration toward first. That was a major point of attack for the Crown.
A huge one. It suggested an element of anger or punishment.
And there's the devastating detail of what Leon, the eldest, did.
Yes. The sources say she fought back and in a moment of just heartbreaking clarity, asked her mother why I'm doing this to them because I'm the best mom and she loves me.
The defense used that testimony to show the horrifying cognitive dissonance she was experiencing.
Hearing her daughter say she was a good mother, even as she was completing the act. After that, she had to proceed to the next step, smothering the still-breathing children with a towel and blankets to ensure their deaths.
Before attempting to take her own life.
With a knife and pills, yes. Graham Dickason returned to the house around 10 p.m. He discovered the scene, and when he confronted his wife, she was in a catatonic state. All she said was, "It was too late."
Police and emergency services responded. Dickason was taken to Timaru Hospital and then the next day transferred to a forensic psychiatric ward at Hillmorton Hospital.
And it was there, during an interview on September 17th, that she admitted to the killings, which led to her immediate arrest.
This brings us to the central conflict of the case, the legal battle. The sources detail a staggering 53 hours of interviews with 5 expert forensic psychiatrists and psychologists.
And this extensive evaluation produced a profound divide in expert opinion. It's what defined the trial. The jury essentially had to pick which version of reality they believed.
And this divide was stark.
Completely stark. On one side, you had the defense experts. Dr. Susan Hatter-Friedman, Dr. Justin Barry Walsh, and Ghazi Matui. They were unanimous. They concluded she was severely mentally unwell, operating under intense delusions, and they fully supported a claim based on insanity or, alternatively, the partial defense of infanticide.
And Dr. Barry Walsh's testimony was particularly powerful.
It was. He noted that even long after the event, Dickason still sometimes feels she has saved the children.
And on the other side, the Crown experts, Dr. Eric Monasterio and Dr. Simone McLevy.
And they held the opposite view. While they acknowledged she was profoundly depressed, Dr. McLevy said she was undoubtedly significantly depressed. They argued she did not meet the legal criteria for insanity.
They believed she killed the children out of anger and control.
Yes, and out of a fear that if she took her own life, Graham would remarry, and she just couldn't tolerate the idea of another woman raising her children.
This brings us to the core legal technicalities. And we should probably pause and define 2 terms the jury had to grapple with: legal insanity and infanticide, especially as defined in New Zealand law.
That's a good idea.
Let's start with infanticide. How does the New Zealand legal system define it differently from murder?
Okay, so infanticide is a partial defense to murder. If it's proven, it reduces the charge for murder, which carries a presumed life sentence, to a lesser offense. In New Zealand, the law specifically applies to a mother who kills her child who is under the age of 10.
Okay.
And crucially, the defense must argue that at the time of the act, the balance of the mother's mind was disturbed. And this disturbance must be because of one of 3 things: not having fully recovered from giving birth, the effect of lactation, or any disorder that is a consequence of childbirth.
So, given the children were 6 and 2, and the last birth was 4 years earlier, how did the defense argue that this applied?
Well, they argued that the trauma of the 17 IVF rounds, the loss of Sarah back in 2013, and the deep PPD diagnosis in 2015 meant her mind had never fully recovered from the combined effects of childbirth and that associated traumatic loss.
So they were trying to show that postpartum depression was a chronic underlying condition.
Exactly. That it contributed directly to the final act, making infanticide a possible verdict.
That's a very technical, very expansive interpretation of disorder subsequent upon childbirth.
Yeah.
It ties her mental health crisis back over a decade.
It does.
Now let's look at the Crown's case for murder. Their argument was centered on proving that she acted methodically, purposefully, and even clinically.
Right. The Crown used the digital forensic evidence, those internet searches for overdosing, to demonstrate planning. They used the fact she hid her symptoms to protect the visa to show rational thought, and they focused intently on that anger and control motive.
They argued the postpartum depression had either gone away or was only a minimal contributor.
And that the true driver was her rage at her perceived failure as a mother and her possessiveness over her children.
The defense countered this by emphasizing the context of suffering. They argued the decision was a spontaneous reaction to this profound, deluded belief that their lives were not worth living and they were all better off dead.
They repeatedly brought up the horrific IVF journey and her distorted view of the world as a dangerous place.
They also attacked the police interviews.
They did. They pointed out that Dickason was generally reliable and consistent when talking to the experts. But the police, in the initial shock and rush, had never explicitly asked her why she killed them, only how. The defense asserted she never told anyone she killed them out of anger, only added this twisted sense of obligation.
And this entire debate really boiled down to the sequence of the killings, in which narrative anger or altruism explained her choice of first victim.
It did. The Crown emphasized that she frequently reported killing Carla first because Carla had been misbehaving, biting and scratching, which strongly supported the theory of anger driving the sequence.
And the defense had to rigorously counter that. They argued Carla was killed first simply because she was the child closest to Dickason when she started.
That it was purely a factor of proximity, not preference or punishment. And this huge disagreement over the meaning of a single detail, the choosing of Carla first, it just illustrates the impossible task the jury had.
Defining intent when expert psychological opinion was so diametrically opposed.
Exactly. It highlights how the law struggles to categorize an action when the mind is operating under severe but debatable delusion.
The case finally went to the jury. Justice Manor instructed them to remain dispassionate and to focus only on the state of Dickason's mind at the precise moment of the killings.
And the choice was clear: murder, infanticide, or insanity.
The deliberation was intense, wasn't it? Lasted 15 hours.
It was. And on August 16, 2023, the jury returned a majority verdict of 11-1. Lauren Dickason was found guilty of 3 counts of murder.
A majority ruling. It signaled that the jury ultimately rejected both the insanity defense and the partial defense of infanticide.
They accepted the Crown's argument that the act was methodical and driven by factors other than, or in addition to, purely clinical insanity or disturbance related to childbirth.
The reaction in the courtroom, it underscored the sheer emotional weight of the case.
It really did. Dickason wept as she was let out, and remarkably, her defense lawyers and several members of the jury were also seen weeping after the verdict.
She was immediately remanded to Hill Morton Hospital under a compulsory treatment order. The judge recognized her immediate mental state made prison inappropriate.
And her parents, Malcolm and Wendy Fox, they issued a poignant statement right away, publicly blaming postpartum depression for the loss of their grandchildren and urging greater societal awareness.
The sentencing phase was also highly complicated.
Very. The New Zealand Sentencing Act presumes life imprisonment for murder, but the judge had to determine if imposing a life sentence would be manifestly unjust, given the profound context of her mental health struggles.
And the final sentencing happened in June 2024.
Yes. Justice Mander imposed 3 concurrent determinate sentences of 18 years in prison.
Can you break down those terms?
Sure. A determinate sentence means a fixed number of years, not life. Concurrent sentences mean the 3 18-year terms are served at the same time, not one after the other. And crucially, she was given no minimum non-parole period.
So she'll remain in a mental health hospital until she's deemed stable enough for prison.
Correct. And upon her eventual release, a deportation order that was served against her will take effect.
The emotional response to this case extended far beyond the courtroom. It triggered a significant public reaction, mostly offering support to Lauren Dickason.
It did. Media comparisons were immediately drawn to the tragic U.S. case of Andrea Yates, noting the similarities.
Yeah.
Both high-achieving mothers, severe PPD, professional husbands, both killed their children when they were alone.
The mayor of Timaru said the verdict brought a full stop to a dark time, but he stressed the need for community conversation.
He did. But the most visible response came from a social media group, Support for Lauren Dickason, which grew to over 1,900 members, predominantly women.
And what was their message? What actions did they take?
Their central argument was that the guilty verdict silenced women's voices about the reality of maternal mental illness, and they undertook some really substantial actions. They compiled a 370-page book of supportive letters called Lauren, Our Love and Support.
They also organized a public march.
In Christchurch, yes, under the slogan Support Not Silence, focused entirely on maternal mental health advocacy. And they organized a petition urging the judiciary to formally recognize PPD as a public health crisis that should factor more heavily into legal defenses.
We even have a record of communication from Lauren Dickason herself while she was waiting for sentencing.
We do. She wrote a letter to her supporters thanking them for your love, and she revealed an intensely poignant detail. She had used her late daughter's clothing to make 3 teddy bears. She added that she could never forgive herself for what happened.
That letter gained media attention.
It did. And it temporarily led to a restriction on her communications at the hospital, though that was later lifted. And the legal process still isn't over. In July 2024, her legal team lodged an appeal against her conviction.
So this could all be reopened.
It could potentially lead to a second trial, And the sheer financial investment in the defense alone, over $709,000, most of it for those contradictory psychiatric reports, it just shows the monumental complexity of this single case. The tragedy of Lauren Dickason and the deaths of Leanne, Maya, and Carla really force us to confront this deep, uncomfortable tension in the legal system. The case hinged entirely on where the law draws the line between criminal responsibility and severe mental illness. The fundamental difficulty for the jury, and for all of us, was distinguishing between an act driven by anger and control, which the Crown successfully argued, and this concept of altruistic murder, where the mother, in a state of severe delusion, believes she is performing an act of salvation.
This trial is a perfect illustration of how fragile the definition of criminal intent becomes when the mind is so profoundly unbalanced.
And when even the highest caliber of medical experts can't agree on the true driver of the horrific action.
It certainly is. This case serves as a powerful, agonizing example of a legal system trying to define culpability in the face of severe mental collapse. And it leaves us with a final question for you to contemplate. How should legal systems around the world balance accountability for such horrific, undeniable acts with the documented evidence of long-term, severe maternal mental health crises, especially when the medical and forensic experts themselves cannot reach consensus on whether the mother knew right from wrong at that moment? This was a challenging analysis, and we thank you for engaging with this material. We focus solely on synthesizing the facts presented in the legal and public record of this profoundly tragic case. Thanks for listening.